Unquestionably, one of the biggest topics in tax at the moment is, of course, the move to making tax digital. And by the time people are watching this, people will be completing digital record keeping in anger for the first time. And the question that I'm asked probably the most on course at the moment isn't to do with the hows and the whys. It is simply to do with, how do I get back out of it? Now, the issue, Amy, is we're not talking here about exemptions. We're not talking about when do I have to enter the regime, when do I not have to. What we're talking about here, in fact, let's cut to the standard question of the moment. My 24-25 tax return has gone in. That is the year that will be the basis to decide if I have to do MTD. The turnover that year was £60,000, but normally my turnover is only £40,000. Who do I have to tell that I'm not going to be doing MTD?
Yeah, and this was actually something that caught my eye on LinkedIn that Craig Ogilvie, the director of MTD at HMRC, posted. He shared that that was the most asked question to him as well. What happens if my qualifying income, which as we know is gross turnover from sole trade and property income added together, what if that was unusually high in 24-25, either because it was an unusual bumper year for me and usually my income is lower than that, or perhaps I'm ceasing my sole trade entirely. So although my qualifying income brings me into MTD from this month, April 2026, I won't have qualifying income anywhere near the threshold going forward. So surely I don't have to join. And the answer is you still do have to join. The rules are quite clear. If your qualifying income on the 24-25 self-assessment tax return is over £50,000, you do have to join Making Tax Digital from April 2026, even if that income is significantly reduced in 25-26, 26-27, and so on.
And what's interesting, of course, here is that we're not talking about, I think people by now know the 50,000, the 30,000, the 20,000. People are comfortable with that. People are asking now about, let's give you the standard example. I have turnover from self-employment of 40,000. I have income from property of 40,000. Neither of those are above 50, so clearly I don't have to do it. We know that's wrong now because, of course, we add them together. And I think sometimes it's useful to move away from the idea of self-employment and property, or self-employment or property, and just say, look, we have in total our mandated income in excess of £50,000, therefore we're in.
Exactly. So rather than looking at separate self-employment income and property income, we need to just see one combined qualifying income stream. And even if one of those incomes is completely stopping, so I have clients, and I know you've been asked questions, Giles, where they're planning to either incorporate in April this month, so they'll no longer have self-employment income for their trade, it will all be through a limited company, or they're planning to retire from that sole trade, but they're still carrying on with either renting out a property or a very small unrelated income stream. They might be doing a bit of tutoring or dog walking or something alongside their main trade. Any of that still counts as qualifying income, even if it's as low as 10, 20 grand a year. And they'd still need to be within Making Tax Digital because of two things. Firstly, on their 24-25 self-assessment tax return, their total qualifying income was above the threshold, and they still have some qualifying income. It doesn't matter how small that may be. They're then locked in to MTD for 3 years.
And the 3-year point, that's where we should talk about the future.
Well, that's the point, yeah. So for people who are thinking, oh, I think your initial example, Giles, was that the qualifying income in 24-25 was 60 grand, but then actually normally it's around 40 grand. Well, they still need to be in because the 3 years covers 3 years when that threshold is dropping, and actually the next year they would probably be mandated anyway. So I can see eventually possibly us getting to a point where Obviously, we know that in 2028 the threshold is going to be 20,000. We don't know what's happening after that. We also are waiting for further information on something that HMRC talked about a year or so ago, which was for self-employment income of 3,000 and below. They are planning to bring in an online reporting system that's less complex than self-assessment. So they're talking quite seriously about taking anyone with income below 3 grand out of self-assessment. They're looking at anyone with income above 20 grand, well, they've confirmed that, being brought out of self-assessment. It's very unlikely we're going to be left with this slice in the middle of incomes between 3 and 20,000, which are the only people in self-assessment. It's far more likely that over the next few years we'll see that 3 grand inch up, so that more and more people are brought onto this, whatever this new online reporting portal will look like, for smaller incomes, and the MTD threshold is quite likely to drop down. So we're not sure. Maybe the 3 grand inches all the way up to the 20 grand. Maybe they meet somewhere in the middle. But I think it's quite safe to assume that eventually, even those with what we would consider as relatively small qualifying incomes are going to end up being on Making Tax Digital at some point.
Okay, and so what we're really saying here is the only way you come out of MTD is if 25, 26 you have ceased to trade, and let me be clear, cease to trade and cease to have any other of the mandated income that would mean you had to stay in. And let's go back to a very simple example. I was trading in 24, 25, I ceased to trade in 25, 26. And that then leads us to the next question. I'm clearly not going to have to do MTD, but how do I tell them that? Who is it I have to ring at the revenue to give that information?
Yeah, so this is a very good question, and this comes back to Craig's LinkedIn post, which gave advice on that exact situation. So what happens if you are either ceasing your sole trade entirely, or you have decided to incorporate, so that will become income from a limited company, and you have no other qualifying income at all? The answer is you do need to contact HMRC to tell them. However, and this is where it gets slightly interesting. The only way to get access to HMRC's dedicated MTD team, get the phone number and be able to call them up, is through joining MTD. So essentially, we're in a position where taxpayers are going to need potentially to join MTD solely to get access to the team who can then send them the letter. And they have said they will send an official letter once you contact them and you tell them that this is your situation. This is in response to taxpayer requests. Apparently they will send an official letter to let you, to kind of prove, I suppose, that you do not need to join MTD, but you've got to be in to get access to get out.
So I think the first thing we should say, I know some people at the revenue do watch this, so hopefully they are hearing our conversation and thinking we could make that easier. There is a way of resolving that. Hopefully that might happen. The other way of looking at this, of course, is the other way around. And we need to consider somebody who doesn't have a business at all in 24, 25, but will have turnover, property income, whatever, from 25, 6. They obviously haven't completed any tax returns yet. Do they just, once MTD is a thing, do you just have to start with MTD from day one? Or does this current year -2 logic, does that continue to apply?
That's a very interesting point as well, Giles. And yes, you're right, that the -2 year rule does still apply. So you would still be 2 years away from being mandated to join Making Tax Digital. But what I would say is if you're starting a business in April 26, 27, and you haven't yet done a self-assessment, you haven't yet entered that system, why would you bother? Why would you do 2 years on one system, knowing full well that in 2 years' time, you're going to have to make the switch to MTD? Surely it makes more sense to voluntarily register for MTD when you start, and then you're just going to be on the same system. You're not going to have that situation where you're essentially learning two separate systems.
So the point is that if I'm starting my self-employment, my property empire is taking off, the answer is I can delay as long as possible, take the 2 years and then enter when I'm forced to do so. Or I could just go early. I could say, look, I'm going to start something this year. I might as well start MTD, because even at the best opportunity, I would learn one new system over 2 years, and then after that 2 years, I'd have to move into MTD. So why learn 2 systems if you don't need to, I suppose, is the point we're making there. Yeah, seems quite an obvious conclusion. And also, we should come back to this point, which we often don't say, I think, enough. People are talking about these questions because they want to delay as long as possible the evil of MTD. No, we don't want to go anywhere near it. The truth is that actually it shouldn't be that terrifying. An awful lot of people, this will not be as scary as people are making it out to be, and therefore get involved rather than delay as long as you can.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of fear around MTD, and that's often the case when something is completely overhauled as a system or something is completely new. There's a lot of scaremongering out there about how many returns or how many updates you'll have to file per year. And actually, I think it's worth taking a step back and remembering that those updates aren't actually particularly involved. It is just a summary of income and expenses for the quarter. You don't have to do any accounting adjustments. It doesn't even have to be completely accurate.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And of course, we have to remember that change is scary. And sometimes I think hopefully by the time we're next talking to you all on AccountingWEB, it won't be that it's all still scary. You'll have started to do some digital record keeping under MTD, and the whole thing will feel calmer already, I'm sure. For today though, Amy, thank you very much indeed.